Well, hello and welcome to the J. Sterling Hughes Show, where we share the secrets of how we are building a rapidly growing law practice. Over the last 9 years, we have scaled our family law firm from 0 to over 25 attorneys doing over $15 million in revenue. My purpose is to document what's working and what's not working for us with hopes that you can take that, recontextualize that, and shorten your success curve. In today's show, I'm super excited because I have a guest, as someone that I've been following with rapt attention on LinkedIn over the past, probably Jonathan, 4 months. So I have Jonathan Hawkins. He's an attorney down in Georgia, runs a firm down there. And Jonathan, your firm's name is Law Firm GC, I believe?
That's correct.
Awesome. So it's good to have you. I'm excited to share your story with folks I know. So maybe you could jump in and just tell a little about yourself and what you're doing.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. So my story, I'll give you the short version. So in undergrad, I went to school for engineering. And before I graduated, I knew I did not want to be an engineer, but I didn't know what I wanted to be.
So I remember what tipped you off when you're going to, like?
I don't know. I just did not like it. I was an industrial engineer, sort of a businessy type degree, but I just did not like it. But I knew I needed to finish college, so I was like, I'll just finish college and I'll figure out what to do. I remember going to the sort of the guidance or the career services department, and I took all these assessments and did all this stuff, and it gave me this top 10 list of careers that would be perfect for me, and 5 of them were different types of lawyers. But my dad was a lawyer, and I wanted to do my own thing. And I was like, I am not going to be a lawyer. So I had no plans to be a lawyer. But then when I graduated, I really didn't know what I was going to do. A friend of mine said, hey, let's go to Costa Rica and learn Spanish after we graduate. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. So we planned to go down there, and he was going to Navy flight school, but he was supposed to go, 9 months in the future. But they pulled up his report date to basically a month after graduation. He said, sorry, I can't go. So I went anyway. I just went. And I spent, about 3.5 months down there, learned Spanish. It was an incredible experience. But I ran out of money. I had a job lined up down there, and I was planning to stay, but they said it doesn't start till January, and this was like September. So I had to come back to the States. So I came back and just started doing temp jobs here with the plan to go back to Costa Rica. And then another friend of mine said, hey, I'm going to Colorado for a ski season. You want to come out there? And I just said, sure, I'll go out there.
And you'd skied before, I'm assuming.
I'd skied before, but I'd snowboard on the East Coast, which is not really, that's the East Coast ice is what they call it.
Right.
And I really wanted to learn how to snowboard. So I said, sure, I'll go out there. I had a great experience in Costa Rica. This would be awesome. So I get out there.
Your dad's back there shaking his head, just like my son is just
yeah,
lost.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
He's just glad I graduated from college. So I get out there and I'm having a great time. But I'm starting to, I'm hanging out with these, 45-year-old ski bums who had moved out there when they were 18 and never left. And I started thinking, I don't want to be this person. Nothing against those folks, but
you're seeing your future, not loving it.
Yeah, I got to do something. I got to be serious. So that's when I decided. I was like, I got to be serious, and that's when I decided to go to law school. And I remember talking to my dad about it, and like a lot of lawyers, he sort of said, I don't know if you really want to do this. He was lukewarm on the idea, but then, I was pretty determined about it, and then he became a good supporter, a great supporter, gave me a lot of good advice. So I went to law school. Wanting to be a plaintiff's trial attorney. So I took all the evidence classes, all the trial clinics. I did mock trial, did everything to sort of set myself up to be a plaintiff's trial lawyer. And then I busted my butt trying to get a job at a plaintiff's trial firm straight out of school and couldn't get one. Nobody hired me. So I ended up clerking for a job.
What kind of law did your dad practice?
He had a mix. He did some trial work. Okay. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and it's not a super small town, but he just grew up at a different time. So he did some transactional work, some trial work. But I never planned to go back to Mobile. It just wasn't big enough for me. And so, I wanted to do trial work. I ended up getting a clerkship, so I did that for a year. And then down in Savannah, which was incredible experience. And then moved back to Atlanta and worked at a med-mal defense firm for about a year and a half. And it was great. I mean, great experience, fast. So depositions, trials, all the stuff, traveling everywhere. And it was really cool. But then I sort of figured out I don't really like the medicine part of it.
That science thing again.
Yeah. But I'd always liked business. And I had, I was here in Atlanta. I went to Georgia Tech here in Atlanta. A lot of my friends were sort of starting businesses and getting into real estate and that sort of stuff. So I wanted to pivot to a practice that maybe I could, utilize those contacts and help them out. So I went to a sort of a business boutique firm that was heavy on commercial real estate and switched to business litigation. Did that for, I think I was there maybe 7 years. Made partner there. And the interesting thing is I made partner, and then a group broke off, and then the firm was dissolved within, 11 months of me making partner. So that was interesting. I went through it on the inside.
Did you have to buy into that? What was that like, getting partner?
So I was a non-equity partner, so I did not have to buy in. I did get to sit in the partner meetings, and so it was very, very interesting experience.
So you're in the partner meetings, and then 11 months later they dissolve.
Yeah, so I remember we had a meeting. This was, the group broke off, and then some other people sort of left the firm, and it was sort of, nobody knew what was going to happen. And we had this partner meeting, I think, scheduled in May. And again, I'm the youngest partner, I'm the newest partner. And we go into this meeting, and we knew the purpose of the meeting was for us all to discuss, what are we going to do? And the lease was going to end in December. And it's sort of like, what are we going to do? Are we going to do this again? Or are we going to keep going?
How many total partners were there total?
There may have been 7 or 8, maybe.
Okay. Oh, good size.
Around there, maybe 9. So the managing partner calls the meeting, and he says, we're here to find out what everybody thinks about what we should do, la, 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 la. And then he looks at me and he says, we're going to start with Hawkins. What do you think?
The new guy.
I found out later that some people knew that was going to happen, but nobody told me. So yeah, that was quite an experience. But I said, I don't want to do it. So, and then everyone sort of fell in line and said, yeah, I think we should end it. That was interesting. Wow. But when I was at that firm, that's when I sort of started the practice that I do now, the niche practice. Started sort of this law firm practice. We can get into that in a minute, but I sort of started that there. After that, I went to another business boutique, and I was there. So when you were
going through that rocky whole situation with the firm dissolving, that's when you kind of got the bug of, hey, I wouldn't mind focusing on law firm practice and being the GC.
Well, I owe it to my dad. This is another thing I owe to my dad. He had done a number of law firm breakup cases in Mobile, a pretty substantial number in a short span of time. And I was doing some business breakup cases in Atlanta of just sort of closely held businesses. And he said, Jonathan, I'm doing a lot of these in Mobile, and Atlanta's, 10 plus times bigger than Mobile. There's got to be tons of these. You should just look at it. Yeah. And so I started looking around, and there was really no lawyer that had sort of planted the flag and said, this is what I do. Right. And so that was the kernel. That was the start of it. So, I've got a full practice that I'm doing, business litigation, but I went on my own and I bought, 3 or 4 really big, thick legal treatises sort of on the topics that sort of apply there, read them cover to cover. I bought a bunch of smaller books, read those cover to cover. I was printing out law review articles and cases and learning those. And at night and on the weekends, I was, I said, I'm going to write a book about this in Georgia. And so I was sort of digesting it and writing this book that I've never finished, but I learned it. That's how I learned it.
Yeah.
And so then I'm going to lunch.
For sure.
Yeah. So I go to lunch and breakfast with folks and just talk about it. Just tell them what I'm learning, all the issues. It was super interesting to me because it was sort of our business. And then eventually I went through the dissolution on the inside. And then, I started doing some pro bono stuff for lawyer friends of mine, really getting my chops. And then I got my first paying client.
Wow.
And then I got my second paying client in that practice area.
So were you doing anything to position yourself among the community, just, I guess, doing pro bono work? But anything else you were doing purposefully to say, hey, I'm the guy for firm issues?
I started publishing some articles. We have a sort of a daily legal newspaper. I published some things there. I think I published some things in some other bar organizations. I started speaking a little bit on the topics. That's really how and then just telling everybody. I just told everybody. I would go to lunch.
I just got the timeline right. You were starting to get into this niche while you were at that first firm prior to its dissolution.
Correct.
And then you went through the dissolution, and that just kind of like, oh man, that lit your fire.
It did.
Okay.
But I will say, I always did business litigation, and I was always in sort of a bigger firm, a boutique type firm. It was sort of difficult to brand it when I was at these other firms.
Right.
You're under this bigger umbrella that did a lot of different stuff. And so it truly was just word of mouth, really, at that time. And eventually, about 5.5 years ago now, I left my last firm and started my own firm. And then that's when I said, all right, I'm going to cut out all the other business litigation that doesn't have anything to do with law firms. And I'm going to focus on law firms and just brand it on lawyers and law firms.
Wow. Yeah. So is that hard? I'm interested in understanding the emotional part of that decision, because here you are starting off, you want to eat and you want to make money, and you had to say no to some cases that came in the door, right? To stay true to your niche. So walk through that. What was that like to have that kind of courage to turn that stuff down, turn money down, turn opportunities down for a new firm to really stay focused on what you wanted to niche into?
So I wish I could say I had a ton of courage. Part of when I left, part of it was I joined a longtime client part-time as sort of in-house counsel. So I did have, I tell people it's like riding a bike with training wheels. So I did have that there. So I was able to jettison large pieces of my practice. But, when a case would come in that was not necessarily within the niche, maybe one out of two I would keep instead of turning away. So
All of your branding and all of your outward communication was all around being a law firm attorney.
Correct.
Okay.
I'd get these cases. It was sort of residual just from, prior efforts and just people knowing me. But eventually I said, all right, I'm not doing that stuff anymore. Eventually, it took me a while, but eventually I did. And, I largely, the only litigation I do now really is sort of law firm related. So law firm breakups, maybe a dispute where I represent a firm against a business partner or a vendor of some sort.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems or one of the biggest mistakes attorneys make is they just don't focus on one thing that they can be known for. And I'm so attracted to that person who just, this is what I'm going to be great at, and I'm going to go all in on this particular thing. I think that just pulls the business into them over time if they can stick with it. It's really hard to do that though.
I'm a huge believer in the niche. I've looked back at mine. I started out, I was sort of litigation. Then it was business litigation. Then I started branding as sort of business divorce litigation. Then I did law firm divorce litigation. and it came down to basically law firm general counsel, because I did have to learn basically all the ethics stuff, and then litigating the business or the law firm breakups. If they had written agreements, they usually weren't really built for the issues that lawyer breakups involve. So then I started drafting agreements to try to minimize or eliminate a lot of the stuff we were fighting about. And that's how I got sort of more on the transactional side.
I'm intrigued by that, Jonathan. So these law firms that are lawyers, like writing their own contracts, not writing contracts that are really going to take care of the issues that they're going to need to be addressed at the time of dissolution. So can you give me an example about that?
Sure. So, there are lots of firms out there that are operating on a handshake. A lot of them. There are law firms that are operating on that have maybe a one-page partnership agreement that may cover a couple things, but it doesn't cover a lot of stuff. Then there are firms that they say, I'm a lawyer. I'll just take this operating agreement from somewhere that I found, and I'll just slap my name on it. And then sometimes, there are corporate lawyers that are probably way smarter than I am, and they do lots of complex deals, and they draft these types of agreements for non-law businesses, but they don't know the ethics issues, and they don't know some of the prohibitions of what lawyers can and can't do. So they build these operating agreements and partnership agreements that, if it was a normal business, they'd be awesome, but for a law firm, they just don't work really when there's a breakup.
Yeah. What are the main reasons why attorneys break up?
Oh yeah.
I know you got some good stories in there on this one.
Money obviously is a big one.
Right.
But if you sort of peel that back and go a little bit deeper, these resentments will build up. I mean, it's like a marriage. I mean, you probably see this in your practice. These resentments build up. One partner may think they're doing all the work, and the other one's just doing nothing, or vice versa, or my contribution is more important than yours.
Right.
And these resentments, they don't talk about it. They just build and they build and they build, and then boom, they explode. That's a big one. Another, sometimes the visions change. Somebody just doesn't want to do it anymore, or they've made enough, or they want a small firm and the other person wants the biggest firm in the city. And if you're not on the same page, it's just not going to work. Yeah. Another, I mentioned the one I went through. Another big one I've seen a bunch is it's the end of the lease, the end of the office lease.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have thought about that one.
And so, the question comes up, are we going to sign up for another 5 or 7 years? And it's a time where everybody reflects, and it could be, fairly amicable, but they just say, yeah, I don't want to sign another lease. I'm not going to commit for another 7 years. Mm-hmm. And they just sort of shake hands and go their separate ways.
Yeah, I see a lot of solo practitioners band together and don't form a formal partnership. They just share office expenses, back office expenses. Do you see issues coming out of those that lead to a lot of messy breakups?
Not so much. There are some sort of ethical issues to deal with there, because you're not in the same firm. You got questions of client confidentiality and, that sort of stuff. And those, in my view, those are purely sort of eat what you kill. We're just going to share overhead. There are actually, those are office share arrangements, but there are like partnerships that are largely, they're actual partnerships, but they're really just sort of an office share. And right. Those are a little bit easier to sort of separate typically. The big issue would be if somebody says, I'm out of here, and there's 5 years left on a lease, and they say you're left holding the bag. That could be a big issue.
Yeah. Interesting. So you're starting to tell your story of starting your current practice. So back 5.5 years ago. So you niched into being the law firm lawyer. What was that like starting it up? How did you get it going? How did you get to the success where you're at today?
So I've had a great time. For the first, I'd say 4.5 years, it was largely virtual. I call it a lifestyle firm. It was me and I had a part-time contract attorney that would help me, no staff. And, it was great. It was fun. Work was coming in. I didn't really, had enough clients and enough referral sources that the work was coming in, and it was manageable. And I was having fun. And then about a year and a half ago, I'm not even sure why, but the work just started. I don't know if it's a function of age. I don't know what it was, but the work just really started coming more. And so I sort of had to make a decision. Do I start turning it away and keep it as a lifestyle firm, or do I actually try to grow it? And I decided to try to grow it. So in the last year, I've hired 2 full-time attorneys, paralegal. One of those attorneys ended up leaving, but I anticipate we'll probably add next year 2 attorneys. I'm based in Atlanta. I'm licensed in Tennessee, licensed in North Carolina. But I want to try to grow this regionally, maybe nationally. So that's really what I'm trying to do now. And it's a whole different set of lessons. You know this, you've done it. Going from just you to starting to add people, things start breaking, you learn different lessons. And then the next lessons that I'm going to start learning is when you add a second office, or an out-of-state office.
Right.
I don't know. Are you in just one state, or
We're in 2 states. We're in Illinois and Wisconsin, so we're right next door. Yeah, I found that there's a step that happens around 8 attorneys where our systems that worked fine for 8 don't start working so well when you get into 10, 11. And then once we got up into that high teens, 20s, we found that again. And then we had to basically reset the whole firm at about 22 attorneys. It took us 2 years to do that. Now we're kind of positioned for, a lot more scale with what we have. The systems we work should get us to 40 or 50. So that's our thinking.
And so when you expanded to the other state, did that add some complexity because you're dealing with the different the bar rules and all that?
It wasn't so much the bar rules. It was more just the nuances and the laws and the counties and the judges, because we're in family law. So judges can be rogue within their own county, and to have counties being so different. And then Cook County, which is where Chicago sits, is its own wild beast in and of itself. And so that was a pretty big challenge. So what we actually screwed up, we went into Chicagoland in 2018, and once we got in, we just got our butts totally kicked, got it handed back to us. So the attorney that was leading that team there, she still leads it today, Katie, and I just told her after about a year, I go, Katie, can you just sit tight for like 2 years? Let us get our crap together up here in Wisconsin, hold the fort, and we're going to come back and focus on Illinois. And then COVID hits, and so that pushed it back a little bit. But now that it's prospering now, but yeah, it's totally different when you're trying to add that extra layer of complexity in another state.
And for me, I like the challenge. It's sort of fun for me. It's probably fun for you. I mean, you're doing it, so. So part of it is I want the challenge. I want to try to do it. My practice probably is not as. I probably don't need as many bodies probably as your practice, just by the nature of what I do. We're not sending lots of people to court all the time. Probably not as high volume as a family law practice.
So the geographic scope of your clients, are they just in Georgia? But you mentioned, I think, North Carolina and Tennessee. You're also licensed?
So I've helped people all over the country. And the way I've done it so far, most states have a multi-jurisdictional practice rule that they've adopted, and which allows, an attorney from another jurisdiction, as long as you're licensed and it's sort of your specialty or your specific area, that you can periodically, on occasion, do something, as long as you're not, going to court. You can sort of do a transaction or whatever in that state. And so the states that have that rule, I'm comfortable doing it. I mean, I don't have enough of a presence anywhere nationally that I need to go get a license yet, although that's coming, and I'll probably also hire lawyers that are licensed in these other jurisdictions if the volume starts to go up.
Mm-hmm. Do you see other firms niching like you're niching, and other? I mean, is it first off anyone in Atlanta doing it yet, and they're watching you and seeing how you're succeeding? Are you seeing this in any other? Because I've never seen it before.
I've only seen one other firm that's sort of niching, sort of like I am. They're out in California. There are lawyers that touch on stuff. I've drawn this Venn diagram. So, you got business litigators that will step in and do a law firm breakup case, but they do a lot of other stuff. And then you have a corporate attorney who does a lot of other stuff, but maybe they do a law firm partnership agreement. And then you got ethics attorneys that do, bar grievance work and legal mal work, and they'll do a law firm breakup. And so there are other people that touch on this, but I have not really found any other, firm that sort of does all three right in the middle. And so, maybe it'll come. Maybe other folks will try it. I think there are folks trying to do it. But it's taken me 12, 13, 14 years to sort of get it going. It's not easy starting a practice area from scratch.
Especially when these lawyers can be their own lawyer and they think they're good at it, right? So that's a tough niche to get established. So your service is anything a law firm would need, from dissolution to contracts to client issues to lawyers leaving individually, taking clients with them, and that whole mess that comes up with. Do you see a lot of, I don't know if it gets to litigation, arbitration, or what it is, with clients, with a lawyer leaving and a client going with? What do you see in there?
Yeah. So sometimes the firms have written agreements in place that may address what's supposed to happen. A lot of times I see the agreements, the attorneys, they go overboard with the agreement. They basically say, you're not allowed to take clients. If you do take a client, all the fees you get have to come back to us. Those types of provisions are not enforceable. Mm-hmm. And so you got to have it. There are provisions you can put in there to protect the firm, but you can't go over the top. But there are fights all the time, particularly in the contingency practices. That's where you really see it, because the case could have been there forever and not generated anything, and then they leave with the attorney, and then all of a sudden 6 months later, boom, they got $1 million recovery. And so there are fights about that for sure, and clients get to choose. You can't have restrictive covenants with lawyers. So it's pretty much, if a lawyer leaves, they're going to get to tell the clients that they had contact with that they're leaving, and the clients get to choose. Yeah.
So I tried to be our own lawyer once. Didn't go well. And I put a provision in our agreement with our lawyers that they have to not accept business from a client once they left. If we gave them a severance and everything, that was contingent on the severance agreement, that they wouldn't accept business from a client at our firm. So a lawyer left, and I got a call from her lawyer like 2 days later saying, I can't do that. Now you're shaking your head laughing like, okay.
Yeah.
Apparently I was unethical, and I didn't know that. I immediately backed off. Okay, fine. That's cool. I didn't know that. So how many of those examples do you run into like that where?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time. There are, there's not a silver bullet provision, but there are lots of hurdles that you can stack to slow it down. And this is for law firm owners, to slow it down. This is one of the biggest fears, particularly in the plaintiff's bar. We're going to get these associates in, we're going to train them up, they're going to get introduced to all our clients, and they're going to leave and take them all. And then we're just going to be stuck with nothing. That is a big fear, and it's a real fear. I mean,
I've seen that reality. Oh yeah.
Over and over and over again. But there are things you can do to slow it down, slow the process down, control the way it happens that are within, I think, the ethical bounds and enforceable ways that can protect the firm, and if nothing else, sort of limit the downside. And give a departing lawyer, maybe second thoughts about how they're going to handle walking out the door.
Mm-hmm. And are you thinking of primarily B2B firms, or would that work as well in B2C?
I think it can work for all types of firms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I routinely draft these agreements for all types of firms. Higher volume firms, I think, have probably slightly different issues than sort of what I'll call the institutional client firms. If there's a lawyer that has a close relationship with the general counsel of some big company, there's not a whole lot that you're going to do. If that lawyer leaves, general counsel is probably going to send it to their friend.
Right.
But on a consumer level, the consumers, they get to know their lawyer, so they feel like that's who they want to be with. There's some non-legal ideas that I have for certain types of firms as to maybe maintain a relationship, have the client maintain a relationship with the actual firm and other people at the firm, so maybe they're less likely to leave.
Yeah, it's a big bummer. You spend a lot of money to attract the client, and then to serve the client while they're there. Then attorney leaves, and you're out all that investment, and that could be some pretty big dollars. And I've always been frustrated with that reality. And I get the client can choose if they want to go, right? That's good. They need to, but man, there should be some sort of way to recoup your costs. But that's a whole mess. So I can see why that wouldn't be a thing. That would be too often used. Interesting. So you're prolific on LinkedIn, and I'm on LinkedIn every day. And I tell you, Jonathan, when I see your posts, I read every single one of them because you always have good stuff to say. And you're not just like putting up a Facebook post disguised as a LinkedIn post. They're like legit value add stuff. And I think I've saved 4 or 5 of your posts in my little saved ribbon thing on LinkedIn. That's great stuff. So what's your, how do you put this much content out that's so quality, and what's your strategy long term?
So, thank you. First of all, part of it is, I mean, I've been creating content a long time. Years ago, I had a blog that I posted to every week in the law firm sort of space. I've taken it down, but I have lots of material to sort of pull from. I pull it from, I listen to podcasts and read stuff and, get ideas there. Just talking to clients. I mean, almost every time I go to a lunch, just with an attorney friend, we're always talking about law firms. I just love it. I just like talking about their practice and what they're doing, because I feel like I can learn something from everybody, what they're doing. And there's always some idea that comes out of it. And I just collect little ideas of what I might post about. So I collect those throughout the week. And then, I usually spend every other week on a Saturday, I'll spend an hour or two and sort of draft out the posts, and I put them in a scheduler. And so they drop. So I'm not on there actually posting them every day. You probably do this too. But, the other thing, I've taken some, like Justin Welsh has a course on LinkedIn.
I took
that.
Yeah,
that's a good course. And, I've seen people, I'm on Twitter a lot. I don't post on Twitter, or X, whatever they call it now, but I just study sort of what people are doing and I experiment. I've tried lots of different things to see, and I'm trying to figure out what might work better than other posts. Mm-hmm. I can't say I've quite figured it out. And it's been fun for me. The other thing is, people say this, you got to learn how to say the same thing 1,000 different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you find something good, just keep beating that.
So,
yeah. I don't notice that. I don't notice your stuff being like a repeat, just kind of a refresh. You didn't put it through ChatGPT and have it rewrite it for you. It seemed like it's really good stuff. So,
it's funny that the ChatGPT stuff, I mean, if you don't rewrite it, it's obvious it's ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. in chat, if you ever have it write a letter for you, it always starts the same way. No matter what you do, you can even put in the prompt like, "Don't say this," and it'll still say it, and that is like, "I hope this letter finds you well," or some variation of that. And so I had a vendor the other day send me a like that, something like that, and I sent it back and go, "You need to go send this to ChatGPT again. I can see you're doing this." He's like, "Oh yeah, sorry." I go, "That's not in your voice." I have an idea for you, and I've been wanting to do this idea, and this might work really well for you, and that is, I think that there's an opportunity or a hole in the market for a really good podcast. Maybe it's a once a month type podcast where you take a firm and you break down the financials of the firm and do a case study on a firm, like a Harvard case study for smaller law firms. Just breaking down the financials, like what are the different allocations and percentages, how much goes to labor, how much goes to real estate, all that sort of stuff. And there's something there that I think could be really intriguing because there's nothing out there like that. And I know there's a lot of lawyers to be interested in, if nothing else, is benchmarks. Anyway,
that's a good
that
idea.
might fit your niche really well. So
That's a great idea. I wonder how many firms would put themselves out there. I don't know.
I mean, if you didn't say what firm it was, I'm sure some would go for it. If you could figure out how to incentivize them to give you that information and go along with you, especially if you gave them something, like some sort of a free eval of all of their contracts. I don't know what you would do, but I'm going to do that at some point. I just got to figure out the incentive, and down the road, we'll see.
But I get a lot of questions from folks about compensation, particularly partner compensation. And so, I don't have like a strict, this is the way you should do it sort of answer, because I think it really depends on the people and the place and sort of the history and the culture of the firm. But yeah, I've started to sort of formulate what I think is, generally speaking, good principle to have for like equity partner compensation. So I have developed some of these things that you could sort of run a firm's financials through these filters and see if they do it. It'd be interesting.
There's a book there, Jonathan. I'm telling you, especially if you can bring in just all lawyer compensation, because there's so many schemes for comping associates, seniors. How do you do that? Boy, we've struggled with that ourselves, trying to figure that model out.
It's tough, and just the labor market, which I'm sure you've experienced. It's been weird the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Very odd. Very odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like it's changed just in the last 6 months. It seems like it's kind of the pendulum has swung back the other way. It's what I'm feeling. We have
I
a
think
much
it has
harder time
softened.
attracting. Yeah, for us, it seems that way. It seems like I'll put up a posting and I'll have 100 applicants for one position.
Wow.
For certain positions. So it's definitely changed, and a lot of them are quality. So we're not just getting folks who have no job. So how can our listeners connect with you and find you?
So definitely go find me on LinkedIn. I pretty much accept any connection request. Just don't spam me with.
Well, I'm really skeptical when I get those ones, the marketing guy. So I'm like, okay, you're in law marketing. Maybe I'll accept you. And then like 5 minutes later, hey, how about this? I'm like, come on, really, please wait a little bit.
Yeah, I'm a little more hesitant to accept those. The others are the pretty Asian women from Singapore that have 2 connection requests. All of a sudden, they're asking to be. I'm like, yeah, that's
Super interested in you. Yeah. I get those too.
So LinkedIn, find me there. My website's www.yourlawfirmgc.com. And then you can find my information there. That's a good way to find me.
And you put out a good newsletter.
So yeah, if people are interested, lawyers, I have a weekly little email newsletter. It is short and sweet. Again, I'm writing for myself. We get a lot of emails and they're long and, dense. So mine are sort of short, to the point, a lot of white space. You can very quickly sort of glance at it. If you don't like it, you can delete it. But I've gotten pretty good feedback on that, and it's really geared towards mostly law firm owners, and it's sort of, things that I see and things that are interesting to me in my practice, and that I think would be interesting to a law firm owner or partner, or aspiring law firm owner also.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's cool to see your practice grow, and I love your niche and your story. So thanks for sharing that with me and for everyone else, and wish you all the best.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoyed it.